Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Run to the Sea, The Raining Hearts Series Book 1 by K.G. Fletcher, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. Order up! Emmeline Fisher sucked in her stomach and stood on her tiptoes to get around her pregnant co-worker and friend who jotted down a breakfast order at a booth along the wall. Quickly, she beelined it to the food counter. "Extra crispy bacon, right, Harold?" she asked, taking a swift breath. "Yes, ma'am, just like you asked. Would I ever let you down, Emmy?" One side of Harold's mouth jacked up into a stupid grin, revealing a few gaps where he was missing teeth. "Thank you," she sing-songed while batting her eyelashes at the middle-aged cook. The shack offered the best and cheapest breakfast in the tiny beach town, always packed from sunup through the lunchtime hour. At 2 o'clock sharp, the place closed. It was a breakfast, brunch, lunch kind of place, the dinner-time crowd having to explore other options at the trendier restaurants along Main Street. Emmeline quickly grabbed the rest of her order and placed it on a large round tray which she hoisted above her shoulder. Crossing the checkered linoleum to the corner booth by the window, she eyed the other tables along the way to make sure her customers were happy. Classic country music played on the old jukebox near the front door, and she couldn't help but hum along to an old Patsy Cline tune. "Here we are, ham and cheese omelet, side of grits, white toast with grape jelly, and a side of extra crispy bacon. Can I get you anything else?" She efficiently displayed each dish in front of the lone customer. The frumpy old woman grinned at the food spread before her and gleefully nodded. She was a familiar face in the area and always ordered the exact same breakfast when she came in. The oversized muumuus she wore were colorful, and her gray hair, parted into braids, looked like two snakes slithering over her shoulders. Her looks were deceiving, and Emmeline knew her to be a retired college professor, a snowbird who came every winter to escape the dreaded cold up north. As the days started to get longer and the weather warmer, Emmeline knew it was almost time for all the snowbirds to migrate back to their homes up north, the summer tourist season quickly approaching. "A little more coffee would be good. Oh, and I used all the little sugar packets. Can you bring me some more of those, too?" Emmeline always took good care of her customers and was often generously tipped. Even though Miss Moo didn't shower the staff with compliments, she made up for it by leaving several greenbacks laid out on the table after she finished. "You got it." The diner was bustling during the peak breakfast hour. The sounds of tinkling glasses, forks, and knives sliding across greasy plates and happy customers conversing over their morning meals were odd but familiar comforts to her anxious mind. It was part of the soundtrack to her life. Being a local in the Sandersville Beach area came with its ups and downs. Mainly, the other locals seemed to know her family history, which made it hard to stay under the radar in the sleepy beach town, especially when she was working. The sideways glances and pitiful looks of sorrow were a constant reminder of her past. She had moved on, so why couldn't they? In addition to her diner job, she held other odd jobs, including being an indie painter and a part-time hostess at one of the Pineapple Grove art galleries, where various artists from all over the Southeast had showings. The fancy nighttime parties were always a massive hit, with artisans showing off their latest collections. All she had to do was stand pretty in her black cocktail dress by the front doors and greet the happy tourists who came for the free champagne and a glimpse of something special. She was excited about the latest artist coming in town, a petite California woman famous for her extraordinary beach paintings. Emmeline knew the show coming up would be a success. Being a hostess at a gallery was a consolation prize of sorts, her own dreams of being a successful full-time artist put on the back burner due to her family's circumstance. Ever the eternal optimist, she forged ahead and knew her time would come, someday. After dropping off a handful of sugar packets to the snowbird, refilling coffee mugs up and down the aisle, and helping her coworkers clear off a couple of tables, Emmeline paused behind the diner counter and took a sip of water out of a bottle with her name marked on it. "Pay." Emmeline turned and smiled at her close friend, Ginger. The white apron around her pregnant belly was barely tied in a knot at the small of her back, and her ankles appeared swollen in her white sneakers. "How are you holding up, Mama? You need a break?" Ginger vigorously nodded. "I gotta pee again. Do you mind? Fran just sat a guy in my section. I'm afraid if I don't pee before I get over there, I'm gonna leave a puddle on the floor." "Go," Emmeline chuckled, gently pushing her in the direction of the bathroom. Tucking a russet curl over her ear that had come out of her ponytail, she glanced at Ginger's section. The breakfast crowd was in full throttle, the place packed. Pulling a pad of paper and a pencil out of her apron pocket, she approached the table in the middle of the boisterous crowd, ready to greet the man who sat alone. "Hey there, are you ready to order, or do you need a few more minutes?" Speaking a little louder than usual over the noise of people and country music, she tilted her head to try to make eye contact with the man. When he looked up, her heart free fell into her stomach. "Cappy?" It was instant recognition, the handsome face of Thomas Capshaw forever branded in her mind. His dark hair was neatly combed back from his masculine chiseled face, and his full lips parted slightly as he stood and towered over her. His expression changed from furrowed brow to joyous recognition in a millisecond. His mouth turned up into a gigantic grin when he realized who she was. Emmeline Fisher. "Oh my God, it is you!" Excitedly, she threw her pad and pencil onto the table and opened her arms wide, practically lunging at her childhood friend. Their hug was awkward, his body stiff and unyielding. When she pulled back, they gazed at each other, the sounds in the room nothing but white noise in her ears. Right away, she noticed his eyes. They were the same intoxicating blue eyes she had spent countless days and nights staring into as they navigated their childhood and teenage summers together. But they were different, too. The bright blue was gone, clouded over with a gray sadness, causing her heart to fill with concern. She realized she was still squeezing one of his hard biceps and immediately pulled back and apologized. "I'm sorry," she chuckled, embarrassed. Using her fingertips, she couldn't help it and lightly ran them down his forearm a second more, as if making sure he was real. Not sure how to overcome the uncomfortable moment, she deliberately clasped her hands in front of her apron. "I thought I might see you at your grandfather's funeral." "You went?" he interrupted, a look of anguish crossing his handsome features. Emmeline raised her eyebrows in astonishment. "Of course. He was very dear to me, to all of us around here. You know that." Briefly, Thomas hung his head, and she heard him sigh. When he looked back up, his lips were turned up in a tight smile. "Yes, he was." His voice was low and even-tempered. "I'm sorry I couldn't make it until now. It's been rough." Emmeline nodded and compassionately reached out to touch his arm again. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Cappy. I know you must miss him. He was a great man." Before he could reply, Ginger interrupted. "Hey there. Thanks, Em. I can take over now." Thomas and Emmeline continued to stare at each other, the tension evident between them. "Geez, is everything all right?" Ginger absent-mindedly started to rub her belly as she looked back and forth between the two of them. Emmeline startled out of her gaze and cleared her throat. Yes. Ginger, this here is an old friend of mine. You knew his grandfather, Lawrence Capshaw?" Her voice lilted at the end of the sentence, her name of his grandfather unrecoverable from her lips, letting the cat out of the bag. Immediately, she felt remorse, knowing that was the last thing Thomas would want to talk about with a complete stranger. "Larry of Cap Cottage?" She gasped and turned to him with a look of empathy across her face. "Oh, Lord, he is missed, darling. I'm deeply sorry for your loss." Ginger's pregnancy hormones must have been raging, and she started to fret over him like a southern mama bear. "Let me get you some strong coffee, darling, while you take a quick peek at the menu. I promise I'll get you some breakfast ordered as fast as I can." As Thomas numbly sat in his chair, Em caught his eye once more before he turned his attention to Ginger. Gone was the warmth he had generously shared all those summers so long ago. In its place was a cold shell of a man. Backing up slowly, Emmeline cleared her throat again and waved, gaining his attention. "I'll see you around, Cappy." He responded with a quick nod, too caught up in Ginger's mothering. Emmeline pursed her lips together and quickly darted into the kitchen. With her back against the swinging door, she tightly closed her eyes, thwarting off warm tears that threatened to surface. The loss of Lawrence Capshaw was huge in the small community. She recalled the little church in the middle of town that overflowed with locals who had come to pay their respects. Emmeline was among the crowd. In hopes that Cappy was there, she had scanned the room several times and was sorely disappointed to see only his mother sitting with some of the late Mr. Capshaw's closest friends. It concerned her that Thomas didn't even show up for the funeral. Wild horses couldn't have kept the Thomas she knew from it. He was not the same boy she had spent summers with eons ago. Over the years, she had yearned for that moment when she would see Thomas Capshaw again. The mere sight of him in the restaurant brought back all kinds of memories, her emotions teetering on edge. His grandfather had been a staple in the small artistic community, and when she would often see him out and about with his wide-brimmed hat and camera over his shoulder, her heart would quicken, as if Cappy might be right behind him. But he wasn't. He seemed to have vanished forever, his grandfather tight-lipped with vague disapproval regarding his grandson's big city living. His abrupt departure from the family had caused a lot of grief, especially for Lawrence Capshaw. The old man seemed to have aged faster from not having his only grandson in his life anymore. Never in a million years could Em imagine Cappy living in New York working as an architect. Whatever happened was a mystery. Em, you feeling okay? With a spatula in his hand, grease splattered across on his apron, and concern etched across his leathery face, the friendly cook stared back at her. Actually, no, I'm not, Harold. Do you mind if I leave? All 3 of my tables are finished. They just need to check out. Ginger and Fran can keep the tips. You look like you saw a ghost. You're white as a hard-boiled egg. She nodded. Yeah, I'll see you later, Harold. Quickly, she untied her apron and threw it on a shelf, grabbing her small purse in the process. Her long ponytail flew behind her like the tails of a kite as she ran down the stairs of the back of the restaurant. She couldn't get out of there fast enough. Chapter 2. Thomas didn't realize how hungry he was until Ginger set a huge plate of food in front of him. With wide eyes, he looked at the steaming omelet cooked to perfection, and his mouth watered. You need anything else? Ginger asked, refreshing his coffee. No, this looks great. Thanks. She nodded, and he watched her wobble slowly toward the kitchen, holding the small of her back. Taking his time, he savored each bite of food, thankful for the uninterrupted meal. Most of the restaurant had cleared out by this time, and he wondered when Emmeline might come back out on the floor so they could continue their conversation. Earlier, her presence had caught him off guard, and he felt terrible for being a standoffish jerk. He wasn't expecting to see a grown-up version of Emmeline. A long time ago, they were the best of friends, joined at the hip every summer through their teens. The last summer he spent with her was especially memorable as they frolicked in the ocean and incessantly teased each other, fighting off their exploding teenage hormones. Thomas often wondered whatever became of her, surprised that she was a waitress. Back in the day, she was obsessed with her art, determined to get out of the one-stoplight beach town and make it on her own. Not only was he surprised to find her as a waitress, but he was also floored at how gorgeous she was. Gone were the chubby cheeks and short bangs of her tomboy youth. Grown-up Emmeline was tall and lithe, her mature eyes the color of polished amber. Her beauty and easygoing nature were a striking contrast to his ex-girlfriend Fiona, who still wasn't convinced they were taking a break from their relationship. The rich socialite and his boss's only daughter could have been a beautiful woman, but her ever-present resting bitch face and matching attitude knocked her out of contention by most standards. In the early days of his career, Thomas was a workaholic and rarely socialized, the loneliness becoming almost unbearable. He latched onto Fiona, who filled a massive void in his life at the time. When he learned the news about his grandfather's death, Fiona was indifferent and never offered a hint of sympathy for what he was going through. He decided to distance himself and take a break from their relationship for fear of coming completely unglued. Truth be told, he was thrilled to be thousands of miles away, glad to have some distance from his chaotic life in the Big Apple, even though the circumstances for which he arrived were heartbreaking. Thomas wished he could sit down and have a lengthy conversation with Emmeline after all these years. Not only did he want to know about her life, but out of everyone in town, he knew he could trust her and ask about his grandfather's last days. If she had gone to the funeral, she must have known he was dying. Maybe she spent some time with him during those last months of his life. If so, he probably talked about what a disappointment his only grandson was to the family. Thomas sighed. It was his fault he hadn't kept in touch with Emmeline. While he attended college, she sent numerous letters to him. Letters he never answered, determined to move on from his pipe dreams on the coast and make something of himself. He couldn't blame her for not wanting to come back out and talk to him. The pace of life in Sandersville Beach was staggeringly slow compared to New York. He forgot what it felt like to take his time, to enjoy a simple omelet for a change. When he finished his breakfast, Thomas leaned his elbows on the Formica tabletop and savored the last of his coffee as he looked around and noticed the various art, including photographs, on the walls. The small, vibrant town was an artist's mecca, and many of the businesses often decorated with the wares of the locals. He'd spent every summer of his childhood until he went off to college living with Lawrence "Pop" Capshaw on the sandy beaches of the Atlantic coastline in Florida. Many of those seasons some of the best years of his life. His pop was a father figure to him after losing his own dad when he was just a toddler. Those memorable summers were when he came of age and discovered his natural artistic abilities. It certainly helped that Lawrence Capshaw was a renowned photographer, famous for his nature photos and popular calendars. A lover of the environment, the late Mr. Capshaw found decades of inspiration while combing unspoiled beaches, saltwater lagoons, intercoastal waterways, and protected wildlife refuges. Thomas fondly recalled his impressionable teenage years biking for miles on eco-friendly adventures with Pop and enjoying the small-town charm of Main Street. They would take weekly gallery strolls, shop at the vintage market, and get treats from the quaint cafes. Adirondack chairs painted with tropical scenes that lined the brick sidewalk through town beckoned them to sit and chat for hours, and the camaraderie continued during frequent outdoor festivals from farmers markets to craft fairs.